In today's class, I'm going to do Introduction to Phonetics. And I will be discussing four major points. 1. What is phonetics? 2. What are the processes involved in speech? 3. What are the different branches of phonetics? And the fourth one is, what is the difference between phonetics and phonology? So this is going to be the structure of this lecture, right? Now the first question is, what is phonetics? Phonetics is the scientific study of the production, transmission, and reception of speech sounds. Now, the common question is, when I ask students, generally, what is phonetics? Because you've done phonetics earlier, students say it is the study of sounds. Actually, it is not, because the study of sounds would be acoustics, which is a branch of physics. But phonetics is the study of speech sounds. So, what exactly do we study in phonetics? We study the production, the transmission, and also matters relating to the reception or perception of speech sounds, right? So we look at various processes involved, processes like production, transmission, and reception. And in addition to that, phonetics also studies the anatomy. For instance, there are speech organs, organs of speech involved in the production of speech sounds. So you look into those organs. That would be anatomy. Neurology. Why neurology? Because basically speech communicates a message, and the formulation of the message or the idea happens in the brain, and this is passed on through nerve impulses or through the nervous system to the speech organs, and this is how speech is produced. So there is a neurological aspect also to speech sounds. So that is also studied under phonetics. And then, of course, the production or the articulation, and also we look into things like phonetics would consider itself, right? Phonetics would concern itself with things like classification of speech sounds and so on. Then let's look at, since we speak of phonetics as something that uh, that deals with the production, transmission, and reception of speech sounds, let's look at the speech act itself. What is the purpose of speech? The simple answer is that it serves the purpose of communication. And what do you mean by communication? Exchange of information. Some sort of idea or message passing from A to B, or from addresser to addressee, or from speaker to listener. So there's this exchange of information between the speaker and the listener. And again, as we said, this exchange involves three stages. One is production, the other is transmission, and the third one, reception of information or reception of message. See, as you can see in this picture, those who are listening to the audio alone, there is the picture which shows a speaker with a few receivers, and the picture, actually I'll try and describe the picture for you. The speaker is the source of the information, and the information is passed on to the receivers through a channel. The receivers receive the message or the information, and at that point, if the receiver starts responding to the message, he or she becomes the source now. So it is a two-way channel. Communication is a two-way channel is involved in communication, from the speaker to the receiver, and when there is a feedback from the receiver becomes the speaker, and the original speaker becomes the receiver. And this is how a conversation would go, right? If it is an interpersonal communication, then this is the manner in which communication progresses, or this is the direction in which communication moves, from the source or the speaker to the receiver through a channel or a medium, and the receiver could respond to the information or the message given, and that would be feedback. Okay, now again we speak about the speech act as an event. That is because there are so many processes involved in speech? Basically, there are three stages. One is production, transmission, and reception. We've already seen that. But then it is not a matter of, a simple production followed by transmission and reception. It's a complicated chain or a series of operations or processes that make the speech act complete. See, only when there is communication of meaning, only when there is communication of exchange of information or communication, speech act becomes meaningful or complete. So, it is not enough if speech is produced. It must travel through the medium of air in the form of sound waves, reach the ears of the listener or the receiver, and the message must be decoded by the receiver in the proper manner so that communication is perfect. Otherwise, there would be lack of communication, or there would be a hiatus, or even misunderstanding if the decoding is not done properly by the receiver. So these are simple things relating to communication. But as far as phonetics is concerned, we have to look at certain processes involved in the speech event. Basically, as I said, production, transmission, and reception. But it doesn't stop with just that. There are psychological, physiological, physical, processes involved in the speech act. So, what is the psychological aspect? We will look at production. Production has two parts. One is psychological, the other is physiological. Physiological meaning, psychological means mental, of course, and physiological relating to the organs of the body, okay, to the body, that is. So, you have the speaker there, producing speech. Now, what happens in the brain of the speaker when he wants to speak? There is a formulation of an idea or a message or some information. It is done in linguistic terms, because when you want to think of something, some message that you want to say, it is conveyed only in the form of language. So there is a formulation of an idea or a message in linguistic terms, meaning using language. And this is called encoding of the message. It takes place in the brain of the speaker. And then this message that is encoded in linguistic terms, it is passed on through the nervous system or in the form of nerve impulses from the brain to the organs of speech, because it is the organs of speech that actually move to produce the real sound, right? The vocal cords are called the sound producing apparatus of the human body. And then you have the organs in the mouth which move to produce specific sounds. For instance, when you want to say pa, the two lips should come together. Otherwise, you cannot pronounce a sound like pa or ma. It's impossible, right? So there are certain movements specified for the production of different sounds, and that happens in the mouth. Okay, we'll come to that later. For the time being, as I said, the formulation of the idea takes place in the brain. The idea is passed on to the organs of speech in the form of nerve impulses or as neurotransmission. And this entire process is psychological in nature, because it involves the brain. Next, the organs of speech that have received some sort of a command from the brain, they start moving. And the movement of the organs of speech to produce speech is physiological in nature, because the organs are involved in movement. So this is a physiological process. And then, of course, after that, the sound leaves the body at the end of it, and well, it has to pass through a channel, and the usual channel for the transmission of sound is the medium of air. You should understand that sound cannot travel in vacuum. It needs the medium of air for transmission, because sound travels in the form of waves, that is by the vibration of the air particles and so on. So, so this part of speech, that is the transmission of speech, is physical in nature. Why is it physical? Because it involves air, which has particles, And so we are talking about matter here, right? Matter in what sense? In the sense in which physics uses it, right? So this part of speech is physical in nature. So this is the physical stage of speech. And then the sound waves that have traveled through the medium of air strike the eardrum of the listener. So there is vibration of the eardrum. Again, you know that this is a physiological thing. So once again, at the stage of reception, the first process is physiological. That is, the listener's eardrums vibrate as a response to the sound waves striking it. Eardrums vibrate. So this is physiological. But again, just because your eardrums are working and you're able to hear the sound, that doesn't mean that you understand what you hear. In case I ask you, comment allez-vous? Did you just understand what I said? No. But you heard me, right? That's because you heard the sound, the sound waves coming from your mobile phone or from your laptop has struck your eardrums and you heard the sound, but you were not able to decode the message. So, for the speech act to be complete, there must be decoding of the message in the brain of the listener. So, reception involves not just a physiological um, vibration of the eardrum, but also the neurotransmission to the brain. So again, the vibration is passed on to the brain through the nervous system, and this is the vibration that is passed on as a neurotransmission or as nerve impulses to the brain. These vibrations are again decoded by the human brain in linguistic terms, and that is when the message is understood by the listener. Okay, so the decoding of the idea in linguistic terms into the message or the information or the idea takes place in the brain of the listener, and this is also a psychological process. So what started as a psychological process in the brain of the speaker became physiological and then physical, and when it reached the listener, it turned physiological and ultimately psychological again. You get it? So there are 5 stages involved in the speech event, or 5 processes involved in the speech event. One is psychological, then physiological, physical, physiological again, and ultimately psychological. So only when all the 5 are complete can proper communication take place. Okay. Um, I hope you understood this. In case you didn't understand, please listen to the audio again. We are talking about 5 stages involved in a speech event. Formulation of the idea and neurotransmission of the idea to the organs of speech, which is psychological. Movement of the organs of speech to produce speech is physiological. The sound that leaves the speaker's body travels through the medium of air, and this is the physical part of the speech event. It reaches, the sound waves reach the eardrums of the listener, setting them in vibration. This is again physiological. And finally, the brain of the listener decodes the nerve impulses sent to the brain as in linguistic terms into a message or an idea. And this is again psychological. And only when all the 5 processes are complete or completed in an effective manner, there is communication from the speaker to the listener. Communication becomes effective or meaningful only when all these 5 stages or operations or processes are done effectively. Okay, it's a very simple idea. Just listen to this again in case you haven't got it. Right? Very simple. Don't worry. So let me take the next slide So I put it in the form of a chain. The speech event is basically a chain of events or a chain of operations, you know, starting from the sender or the speaker, followed by, as I said, yes, the source is the encoder, eh, and then it is followed by sound waves, and then you have the receiver who does the decoding, and the analysis and interpretation of the message also happens in the receiver. So this is the speech chain in a nutshell. Now I'll move on to the next part of this introductory class or lecture, the different branches of phonetics. As you can see on this slide, there are three main branches: articulatory phonetics, acoustic phonetics, and auditory phonetics. And then two specialized branches, taxonomic phonetics and laboratory phonetics. First, we will look at articulatory phonetics. It is also called phonological phonetics. So what is articulatory phonetics study? Basically, phonetics is a study of speech sounds. So this branch of phonetics, articulatory phonetics, what does it study? It studies the production and articulation of speech sounds. So it concentrates on the first stage of speech act, which is production. It looks into the movement of the organs of speech. As I said, the organs of speech are the sound producing or sound making apparatus of the human body. It studies the movement of the speech organs in the articulation of speech sounds. So it recognizes the fact that speech is produced by a sound making apparatus in the human body. And specific sounds are related to specific movements of the organs of speech. So a knowledge of the organs of speech is also essential in order to understand how speech is produced. It is also essential for the classification of speech sounds and so on. All right. So articulatory phonetics basically concentrates on the production of speech sounds, organs of speech, movement, classification of sounds on the basis of the organs of speech, etc. So these are aspects looked into by articulatory phonetics. Next, of course, is acoustic phonetics. What does it study? Acoustic phonetics basically deals with the study of the physical properties of speech sounds. Remember, physical used in the sense in which the word is used in physics, relating to matter. So we are dealing with aspects of transmission. The sound travels through the medium of air. Now, can you hear me properly? What if you what if you mute your audio? You will not be able to hear me. I'm producing speech here, but there is a barrier. So you just unmute your video, but you hear it at a very low volume. Again, there is a problem. You may not be able to hear me properly. So what you need to do is increase the volume, which means we are talking about aspects like amplitude, volume, frequency, etc., which can have their effect on transmission and reception of speech sounds. So if I speak in a very bass voice like this, my voice may not carry very far. On the other hand, when I talk in a very shrill voice, it's possible that my voice will be heard, my speech will be heard well. Got it? So we're talking about the transmission of speech sounds and how the effectiveness of the transmission can be affected by certain aspects or categories like amplitude or volume, frequency, that is frequency of vibration. We are talking about, in your physics lab, you might have done the experiment of testing the frequency of the tuning fork and so on, right? So related to that, of course, is related to vibration and so on. We will look into this later on because we are talking about the vibration of the vocal cords here by frequency. You don't have to worry too much about this right now. Just remember that acoustic phonetics basically deals with the physical properties of speech sounds, things like amplitude or volume and frequency, and how this can affect transmission and reception. Okay. Third important branch of phonetics is auditory phonetics, which is also called perceptual phonetics. Now, what is this branch of phonetics study? What does it study? It deals with the reception, comprehension, and reception, hearing, and comprehension of speech sounds. So, we are talking about auditory impressions like quality, pitch, and loudness of sounds, and so on. This again, the loudness of sound is related to amplitude, definitely, right? The speaker has spoken in a loud voice, right? There are no barriers in the medium of transmission. There is no noise, external noise, or there is no brick wall, between the speaker and the listener to prevent the transmission of sound. So definitely loudness would be related to amplitude and the medium of transmission, but ultimately it depends on the condition of your eardrum also, right? That is why auditory phonetics would still look at loudness of sounds, because sometimes loudness of sounds could be affected by the condition of your eardrum. If you're 80 plus, then you could be hearing impaired, in which case the perception of sound may not be perfect. The way you receive sound may not be perfect. So, auditory impressions of the quality, pitch, and loudness of sounds are also studied under auditory or perceptual phonetics. So, there are three main branches of phonetics: articulatory, acoustics, and auditory. These are the three main branches. And in addition to this, you also have two specialized branches called taxonomic phonetics and laboratory phonetics. Now, what is taxonomic phonetics? I think I've made a mistake in the spelling there on the slide, PowerPoint slide. Taxonomy, not taxonomy. Got it? I'm sorry about that. I'll make the correction. Taxonomy. Taxonomy. You've done taxonomy in your botany classes or biology classes, right? What is taxonomy? Classification. Classification. Again, taxonomic phonetics studies classification of speech sounds. And the classification can be done on the basis of various things. And most often, it relates to the organ of speech involved in the production of sounds. So, classification of vowels is based on tongue position, shape of the lip, etc. Or classification of consonants could be based on position of vocal cords or speech organs involved, and so on. Okay, so taxonomic phonetics basically deals with the classification of speech sounds. And finally, laboratory phonetics. Again, you can use different alternatives like, or other terms like experimental phonetics or instrumental phonetics for the same thing. Laboratory or experimental or instrumental phonetics. This branch of phonetics is concerned with phonetic studies which involve the use of mechanical and electronic equipment or apparatus. So acoustic and auditory phonetics, both of them. Earlier we spoke about acoustic and auditory phonetics. Even they use instruments and hence come under this category. As I said, when you want to test the frequency of the sound produced, you will definitely have to use some sort of equipment, to test the frequency. So again, auditory phonetics also, to a great extent, can use instruments, and hence even acoustic and auditory phonetics can be included under laboratory or experimental or instrumental phonetics. Why is it called experimental? Because these are, the use of equipment or mechanical apparatus or, some electronic gadget. The use of these happen only in the initial stages of studying the sound system of a language. and the phonetician might be forced to make use of these equipment these instruments in order to make perfect conclusions about the sound system of a language. And that is why you call this branch of phonetics as experimental, and also because it's called instrumental because it makes use of instruments. And most of these experiments are carried out in the laboratory because they make use of sophisticated equipment like electrocardiogram, then X-ray photography. For instance, if you want to know the movement of the vocal cords, then I'm sure you will have to make use of X-ray photography and so on, right? So all that is possible only within a laboratory, and that is why this branch of phonetics is called laboratory phonetics or experimental phonetics or instrumental phonetics. So we looked at the three major branches of phonetics: auditory, acoustic, and auditory phonetics. And finally, the two specialized branches, taxonomic and laboratory phonetics. And now we come to the third question. Is it the third one? Or I think this is the last question. When I mentioned the overview, we said we will look into 4 points. One, what is phonetics? Secondly, the different stages or processes involved in speech. Third, branches of phonetics. And the fourth one is the difference between phonology and phonetics. Normally, I would ask my students, to give me a feedback on this. What is the difference? What is phonology? You would say study of speech sounds. What is phonetics? Again, study of speech sounds, right? So if they mean the same thing, you know how it works in languages. When two words have exactly the same meaning, one word will just vanish out of use. It becomes obsolete or redundant. But in phonetics, if we use two terms like phonology and phonetics, there definitely should be a difference between the two. And what is that difference? Phonetics, as I said, is the study of speech sounds. It looks at production, transmission, and reception of speech sounds. But it is a study of speech sounds, all these aspects of speech sounds and their properties in general. So we speak about how the human body produces sound, how it is transmitted through the medium of air, and how the receiver's body receives it, perceives sound, etc. In general, when you discuss production, transmission, and reception of speech sounds, you call it phonetics. But phonology is the study of the speech sounds of a particular language. So basically, our syllabus is on English phonology. Of course, the first few topics relate to just phonetics, dealing with aspects of production and transmission and reception, basically production. But as you advance to topics like classification of consonants and vowels and accent and intonation patterns and so on, we talk about only English sounds and the way in which English is spoken, which means, suddenly we move from phonetics to phonology. So phonology is that branch of study which deals with the speech sounds of a particular language. How certain sounds organize themselves to form syllables or words in a language, right? From the entire repertoire of speech sounds available to human beings, no single language uses all the sounds that can be produced by a human, all the speech sounds that are used in the different world languages. No single language uses all of them. On the other hand, each language has its own repertoire. For instance, we all know that English uses only 44 sounds. Malayalam probably has 50 plus sounds, right? So each language has its own set of sounds. And when you look at the way in which these sounds are combined, the way in which these sounds are combined to form syllables or words which carry meaning, that would come under what you call phonology, because we are talking about speech sounds of a particular language. So we will of course be doing English phonology in detail later, but at this stage, at the introductory stage, I think this will do. Phonetics is the study of the speech sounds and their properties in general, but phonology is the study of the speech sounds of a particular language. That brings us to the end of this lesson, or this section. So I'll just do a summing up. What have we been looking into? Phonetics. We defined phonetics as the scientific study of speech sounds, especially the production, transmission, and reception of speech sounds. Then we looked into the speech act or the speech chain, and we said it is a complex series of operations or processes, some of which are psychological, some of which are physiological, and even physical, right? And then we looked at branches of phonetics, the three major branches like articulatory phonetics, acoustic phonetics, and auditory phonetics. And the two specialized branches like taxonomic and laboratory phonetics. And then